All right, y'all, it's Ron Goodall, FightHype.com. I'm here to give a post reaction to Brian Norman Jr. knocking out Jin Sasaki in the 5th round with a devastating left hook. And, I didn't have a full-on prediction video or anything like that, but I did expect Brian Norman to dominate Sasaki. He was the guy who was more defensively responsible, more experienced, and he definitely has dynamite in both hands. And Brian Norman Jr. used to be a Jin Sasaki, a guy who relied on his aggression, his youth, used to overextend and pretty much put himself in position to get countered. And I remember at one point when he was facing Giovanni Santillan, he was the underdog. I would agree, a guy that was sparring Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, destroyed Alexa Rocha. It was hard to really pick Brian Norman in that situation. And after I spoke with Brian Norman around that time, he told me something extremely valuable, that it almost was an extremely mature response, where at some point he had this weight on his shoulder to have to perform on the Top Rank banner. And because of all the rumors and stories of him sparring with guys like Terrence Crawford and Gervonta Tank Davis, which now everybody knows, him and Jaron Ennis had many sparring sessions later on, that he kind of just didn't allow that hype to carry on and just felt more at ease being the underdog and not this favorable guy to dominate. And then from that point, the mindset of just kind of fighting as free as he's been has shown. He dominated Giovanni Santillan for the vacant WBO title. He had his first mandatory defense, and little rust that you can see because of the long layoff that he had, but afterwards he was able to quickly adjust, and even then became extremely active by taking on Jin Sasaki. And he just looks like a completely different fighter from the Boca Chica fights of his career. So in my personal opinion, we are dealing with the youngest male world champion, and we're starting to see him evolve from that point. His shot selection has been improving, his defense has been improving, him not overextending and just jumping on unnecessary, counter opportunities. Just because it's there doesn't mean it's the right one to shoot for. Because, Jin Sasaki was definitely throwing a lot of bombs and stuff, and I think landed a couple left hooks here and there. But what really stood out was that Brian Norman not only just dropped him early on with the left hook, but didn't rely on the left hook in his left hand when really systematically around the 3rd round-ish, he broke him down with a right hand. He really has a great sneaky right hand, and every once in a while he'll try to do that right uppercut. So he has a lot of tools in his arsenal, and I think everything showed where this kid has a lot of potential when originally he was written off by a lot of people, myself included, thinking that, okay, maybe this is his ceiling. But really what it looks like is that ultimately it was a young kid that was making mistakes publicly on the professional stage, and now we're actually watching him grow. And what's very unfortunate, and I think that it's still the honest thought, that Jaron Ennis would be by far the favorable pick if him and Boots would happen to face. But very unfortunate this fight was never able to materialize and get made after 2 attempts. And I know that the first attempt was very publicized with a lot of numbers and theatrics and back and forth, which eventually somehow was able to work out Stanionis and Jaron Ennis fight. And so, which was great for the division, which was great for a guy, Jaron Ennis, who has been looking for a signature win, not the marquee win, but just a signature win in the division where he's able to now, what he's doing, move into a whole nother division to 154. And with the news of him kind of breaking it himself the day before or day of, the Jin Sasaki and Brian Norman fight, definitely, took away a potential unification fight and one step closer to an undisputed at 147. So I know that Boots has been at 147 for a long time. Granted, going to 154 does seem like a great move. There's a lot of killers in there as well. But with the imagination of Brian Norman developing and becoming a better fighter. And I'm not comparing Jin Sasaki to Jaron Ennis by far, please bear with me. But just let alone seeing the improvement of Brian Norman Jr. gets the fight fans excited about the idea of what if. And even with that highly favorable pick that many people would pick with Jaron Ennis, only because, the body of work and how consistent that he's been throughout his career, and Brian's still, young and new on the scene, it just leaves this unfortunate fight just tossed to the side at the moment, and hoping that Brian Norman would maybe eventually make the move to 154 when he gets a little bit older. But with two guys that are explosive, dynamite, athletic, power punching knockouts, fighters who love to take risks, go forward, and also great counter punchers, it's just like, damn, what a missed opportunity for now. And that's what, Brian Norman told me when I interviewed him, that he didn't feel like it was a missed opportunity. So we're just kind of going to have to wait to see what happens from here on out. But ultimately, I was impressed with Brian Norman's performance with Jin Sasaki. I know that he's probably not going to get the credit of a Jin Sasaki, only because a lot of us aren't familiar with Jin Sasaki, or even seen the very noticeable flaws in the 5 rounds that Jin Sasaki's defense was just not at the level of a world championship fighter. But you could still appreciate the poise and calmness of Brian Norman. And as they always say, right, if he doesn't belong in there, show the world that he doesn't belong in there. And that's exactly what he did. So I'm going to honor that. I'm going to take that vicious, hellacious knockout for what it was. It was a world champion separating himself on the world stage in another country at a very young age and taking on that challenge. Maybe one day we'll get, Norman boots. There's still a welterweight division that's still, materializing and coming together. Maybe someone will come up to 140, from 140 to 147. I know Devin Haney has kind of poked the bear a little bit. Rolly Romero just got a title, or a form of the WBA, which will probably be elevated now. 2 belts are going to be vacant. And then Mario Barrios and Manny Pacquiao, which by all means, age, may be a huge thing for Pacquiao, but it's still Pacquiao. So there's still that WBC that Brian Norman has told me that he is really aiming for. So I don't know what the division's going to be over the next couple months, let alone a couple years. But as young as Brian Norman is, he's going to improve. He's going to get better. And I'm looking forward to seeing his career, and I think he's going to the right direction. So overall, I would give Brian Norman a really good rating. I don't know, maybe on a number scale, based off the fact that his opponent was probably highly favorable to lose, and that's how he performed. Probably like a 9.5. Because he did what he was supposed to do, and he did it. So I can't even be mad. I wasn't expecting anything less or more than that. Maybe if he took maybe one less left hook, I don't know, maybe that would be a flawless 10. But really, I think for the type of fight that was, and for what the boxing fans expected, he did that and more. So I would definitely probably say less than 9.5. Now, is that a 9.5 type of opponent? No. But until then, we will see, if he gets those type of opportunities. But just another day of just being a boxing fan, seeing that we were this close of potentially getting a unification fight. Norman asked Matchroom Eddie Hearn to wait for the next day after the fight to start the negotiations. And I understand that on Jaron and Matchroom's side may potentially go, well, we tried this before, don't want to take the risk again. And seeing, I think there's been also stories that Jaron has went to the doctor and claims that, he's not fighting at an optimal level percentage of his body. It's just a matter of time for him to go to 154. So there's a lot of great fights for 154 for Boots. Virgil Ortiz is the one that stands out the most, but there's Bachram, there's Madrimov. I mean, there's all different type of fights. And then for Norman, a division that probably, if Pacquiao would happen to win and probably retire, it leaves a very, 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 very young early welterweight with another situation where a young welterweight champion waits for the other guys to catch up, and maybe by that time it might be too late. So maybe he'll be the Jaron Ennis of that welterweight class and has to move up until another Norman himself comes through. But till then, we wait and see. Mario Barrios could win, could possibly beat Pacquiao. You know, I think he's the big favorite in many cases because of the age. But if Mario Barrios would happen to beat Pacquiao and Norman and Barrios fight, that would be a huge profile lift for him. So, but we'll see how it goes. Other than that, continue to watch Fight Hype. It's your boy Ron over here, and we will continue to drop some of the best interviews and the best content out there in boxing. Peace.